Inquisitor, your hat looks beautiful in the light of the cicatrix. Right. Army lists.
Vampire jump scare. Now, we have 3 tournament victories, 2 for Battle Sisters and 1 for the Genestealer Cult. I don't know exactly how these lists were played, as I haven't been able to find any live streams, and not every tournament is live streamed, but I have a pretty good idea, but I can give you some suggestions for how to use these lists, and some reasons why the lists work, so you can adapt them to your own collections and style of play. I'm going to analyse one Sisters list, then the Genestealer Cult list, and then back to another winning Sisters list. Last weekend, we had the East Anglian Grand Tournament 2, won by Jake Tite's Battle Sisters. This is the list. Now, if you've been around on the channel for a while, you'll recognise some things, but first, we've got to place the characters. We have 2 Battle Sister squads, so each Battle Sister squad gets a Dialogus and gets a Palatine. You may have been thinking, oh, Palatine plus Dominions because then both can scout, but if you look back on my video about making all of the Miracle Dice 6s, then the Dialogus plus Battle Sisters plus a Palatine plus the Triumph is an excellent combination for Battle Sisters that have Melter weapons. The Dialogus turns Miracle Dice into a 6, the Palatine's lethal hits make a hit roll of a 6 on a Melter weapon, an auto wound as well, and with the Triumph you can do multiple acts of faith, so assuming that the enemy fails their invulnerable save if they have one, you can also use a Miracle Dice on the damage. A good Miracle Dice, because that first Miracle Dice could be a 1. So that's using the Triumph's Ebon Chalice bonus, but we can also have the Argent Shroud bonus for additional shots on all of the rapid fire bolt guns. The Palatine with the Saintly example could go with the Dominions, or half a Dominion squad, because they can be split by an Immolator. So the Palatine could go with some Dominions to strike, and then die, and then generate additional Miracle Dice through Saintly example. This could also be present because of some spare points, but it could also be because of an interesting rules interaction with the Triumph. If you choose to have the Fiery Heart as one of the 2 lead singers for the idol group known as the Triumph of St. Catherine, then, when a unit is destroyed, you get a 6 as a Miracle Dice. With Saintly example, you get an additional D3 Miracle Dice for D3 plus 1, as there is no specification to say that it is only 1 dice that becomes a 6 from this Fiery Heart ability. This could be ruled as, you get D3 plus 1 6s as Miracle Dice when that Palatine dies. So I expect the Palatines and Dialogi will be with the Battle Sisters as full units, the Dominions will be split into 2, each one going in an Immolator, and those Immolators can move up with Scout and control the mid-board objectives from turn 1. But the Battle Sisters look very geared up to be the damage dealers, with the Triumph providing auras, and the Sisters have Melter weapons for the 6s to work. We also have, on the superiors, Condemner bolt guns to cause devastating wounds to Psychic Greater Demons, Zone Thropes, and tough units with Psychic leaders like Rubric Marines and Eldar Wraithguard with Spirit Seers. I prefer the Condemner bolt gun over a combi weapon because it hits on a 3+ and is basically a bolt gun, but with an extra anti-psychic hit. It's what I recommended in my video in building Battle Sisters. That's pinned down in the comments if you want to click on it to get more advice. I prefer the Condemner over the combi weapon because you may not be shooting at infantry, you probably are, but 2+ on the anti is better than 4+ on the anti as the special ability. And I like better hit rolls. A combi flamer that hits only half the time because it's on an unwieldy combi weapon which is strapped together from bolt gun and flamer, it doesn't sit right with me that it misses. And I like hunting witches. 1 unit of flagellants will be on a rhino, and the other 2 units will be on foot. You can't split an arco-flagellant unit with the Immolator, that's limited to Battle Sisters, Novitiates and Dominions. Basically the sister squads that start at size 10, while arco-flagellants are size 3 as their lowest points level, and go up to 10. So if you wanted them in an Immolator, which there wouldn't be much point because the Immolator supports shooting units with its special ability, you could, but it would be 2 units of 3. Or if you really want to be points unoptimized, which you shouldn't, 1 unit of 6. And we have 3 lovely organ weapons, the Exorcists, to provide those indirect fire support to get rid of enemy monsters and vehicles. And enemies that are on their home objective. Because if you can knock them off that, that's a lot fewer points and they'll have to put in a different, more valuable unit to hold that objective. The counter to that would be if you have a unit with sticky objectives to start there, something like Cadians or Chaos Cultists. The mob kind of Chaos Cultist, not the Accursed Cultist or the Traitor Guard kind of Cultists. The Genestealer Cult list. Colton Cox's Genestealer Cult that won first place. Now if you remember my tier list for the Ascension Day detachment, we have a lot of focus on battle line units and arriving from reserve. So the detachment very much supports having a lot of acolytes and neophytes. That, and with this number of models, you can flood the board with Objective Control 2 units. This list is 130 models. So its biggest problem is being able to have all of those units transported to the tournament, not get damage in the process, and then the game not take so long, because remember these are coming back, that you get any kind of time penalty if you're in a tournament where they use time penalties and time clocks and things like that. So having the dice ready for them to fire, already in like, here's the bag, this has the right number of auto gun shots and seismic cannon shots and grenade launcher shots, you roll them all at once, and it can be done as quickly as possible. Movement trays. Movement trays would be very useful. We have an interesting use of inscrutable cunning on a Clamavus. This is normally reserved for aberrants with a biophagus or an abominant. This allows you to forward deploy an acolyte unit. You could use the bombs early, and that's a good idea because on turn 2, you can only use the tunnel crawler's stratagem once per turn, even with a Nexus, as that is not a battle tactic. But it is probably better with a neophyte mass with mining lasers and grenades that have a bit more range. You could hold the enemy up in the center, and because you have the 12-inch aura of no deep striking denial with that Clamavus, you can also protect units like the Saboteur and the Sanctus with the sniper rifle. You're deploying on an objective, one of the central objectives, and so the neophyte's ability to generate command points is active right from the start of the game. And if you needed to redeploy the unit and send them into reserve with Return to the Shadows, don't forget the second part of Inscrutable Cunning, you can get a command point back on a 4+. While there is a limit of 1 per battle round, it is an extra dice if you've already failed 2 neophyte rolls. This is the third chance to get an extra command point in that battle round. The other Clamavus and more neophytes with mining lasers, they go on the home objective. The 12-inch aura from the Clamavus denies the enemy deep striking onto that home objective. You can generate command points with the neophytes, and you have 24-inch range weapons to shoot with. The Clamavus is a good choice for the meticulous planner enhancement. It essentially, but not actually, turns off the best enemy stratagem they have. You need to be on the table to use it, which is why the Clamavus sitting on your home objective is the best place to put it. Just remember that when you're targeting an enemy stratagem, don't pick a battle tactic stratagem because potentially the enemy has characters like our Nexus that let you use battle tactic stratagems for free. Now you can still make Armor of Contempt harder, especially on the Ironstorm detachment, which is a Dreadnought heavy marine list. There are no characters attached to Dreadnought, so you're okay there. Or we'll want to stop guard reinforcements or the Eldar Phantasm. And the Clamavus should be in the back, so that's a safe place to use it from. My thoughts on the Clamavus have generally been that it is a useful character, I just hate that he also runs the Cave Rave from Matrix Reloaded. Jockeying discs is not a transferable skill into battlefield leadership. The Sanctus is there to get rid of enemy psychic characters, so we are still seeing a lot of Eldar at the top tables. A lot of Eldar lists also have Wraithguard. Those Wraithguard are led by Spirit Seers. Spirit Seers have 3 wounds, and the Sniper does 3 damage. We get Anti-Psyker 2+, and we also have Devastating Wounds. So if you wanted, you could pick Wraithguard as your target for their special ability, and be putting Devastating Wounds on regular Wraithguard, not necessarily the Spirit Seer. But I would want to get rid of the Spirit Seer as soon as possible. At that point, the Wraithguard unit would lose a Psychic keyword, so we wouldn't be getting Devastating Wounds on a 2+, only on a 6, but that would be their job. Get rid of the Wraithseer, and potentially other psychic characters like Farseers, if the enemy took an additional Psyker that lets you change those fate dice into 6s, kind of like a Dialogus. It has a lot of utility, and doesn't just work on their own unit. It's an aura for the Farseer. There are 3 Primuses, and I expect that 2 of them would go with the Acolyte hybrid units, and a third one would go in a Neophyte squad that has seismic cannons and grenade launchers. The reason being, of all the Neophyte squads we have, that's the one that's firing the most shots, so is most in need of rerolls. The Nexus could be with one of the other Neophyte hybrid squads by itself, or the Nexus can double up with one of the Primuses, either on Neophytes or Acolytes, and then you can have a free perfect ambush with the Primuses full reroll to hits. And I say free perfect ambush, you're paying the points for the Nexus, but it's worth it to boost the combo of Primus, Nexus, plus Acolytes with demolition charges so you can take down something like a Redemptor Dreadnought in one go. We also have the inclusion of a Kelemorph. I of course would prefer to have an additional Reductus Saboteur, but the Kelemorph has his uses. We need to stop thinking of the Kelemorph as if he's still in his 9th edition form, as some kind of pop-up assassin or destroyer of elite units. He is definitely not doing that with this gun profile. He is there for actions. Yes, he can shoot back when the enemy shoots a neophyte unit, such as the one that's deploying on the objectives in the middle of the board, but his benefit is he can deep strike within 3 inches of a Genestealer Cult battle line unit. It doesn't matter if he's deployed within 9 inches of the enemy. So as soon as you have, oh, I need to perform an action on this objective to cleanse it, for example, you want your neophytes and your acolytes to be doing something, shooting, charging, distracting the enemy. The Kelemorph can pop up right behind the neophytes, even if the enemy are really close or in combat with those neophytes, and he can be cleansing that objective, which presumably you control because of the number of Objective Control 2 neophytes that are within 3 inches of the objective. So he's good for contested objectives and still being able to complete secondary actions. But I'm more of a bomb lady person. The third list is Aidan Brocklehurst's, and we're back in the UK for another Sisters victory. It is quite similar to the first list. We have the Dialogus, the Palatine, and the Triumph, covering the 2 Sisters units that have melter-guns. There's an Immolator, and in this list it splits the Battle Sister squad with the Flamers, so that they can be on 2 separate objectives and generate more miracle dice with their special ability, and control the objective. The Flamers are good for coming out of an Immolator because they auto-hit, because Torrent, and with the Immolator unit ability, then you can reroll the wounds. And notice the Hand Flamer on the Superior, as well as the Regular Flamer and the Heavy Flamer. The Imagifier would stay near the centre for when those 5 model sister units die, along with any tanks or Arcoflagellants. All of those units have the Act of Faith rule, so not only can all of them use Miracle Dice, they also provide Miracle Dice when destroyed. The Imagifier lets you reroll that dice, giving you better Miracle Dice, and provides a 4+ invulnerable save to a bigger sister unit. This list also includes 2 units of 2 Crusaders. You may yet have a week to go into, or back to, a Games Workshop store, and if they have any of the Model of the Month left, you can get a great Crusader proxy. Just pop on a helmeted Battle Sister or Skitarii head, and it looks perfect. Now, they can perform actions on objectives, and be a unit there for things like behind enemy lines, and the table quarters if you're going to outflank them, but they also have another use in this list. Rhinos can transport 12 models in 10th edition, so 2 of the Rhinos will have 10 Arcoflagellants and 2 Crusaders. Yes, one of the uses then is to drop them off on objectives for actions while the Arcoflagellants take hits, block enemies, and fight in close combat with enemy units, but it also allows you to exploit the stratagem of suffering and sacrifice. This is absolutely amazing against monsters and elite units. Models within engagement range of the Crusaders must allocate their attacks to the Crusaders. So if the Arcoflagellants and the Crusaders charge some Chaos Terminators, the enemy is probably not going to think to use Overwatch on the Crusaders. Or, to stop them, charge with the Arcoflagellants first. Then, you get the Crusaders into base contact with as many Terminators as you can. Even if the enemy removes those models from Arcoflagellant attacks, the Crusaders pile into as many as they can, and the remaining Terminators that are in engagement range will have to attack those Crusaders. So you're not just trading Arcoflagellants for Chaos Terminators, you traded a 25-point unit for a 200-point unit of enemy elites. And if there's Angron, or a Bloodthirster Greater Demon, it's like your Arcoflagellants are getting a full turn of attacks, free from retaliation. The Palatine has a Blade of St. Eleanor, but in this sort of list, adding a Preacher with the Blade is also viable to enhance the Arcoflagellants that are doing the combat damage. We would have to switch out something else, but the Preacher has a once per battle ability to increase its strength and attacks by 2, which goes very well with the Blade. So if the Preacher has the Zealot's Vindicator, and has lost 1 wound, then that Religious Fanatic is going to be doing 7 attacks at strength 9, AP -1, and 4 damage. But more than likely, your Preacher is not going to be wounded when you use this, and you'll want to use their Zealot ability as soon as there is a suitable target, but that's still 6 attacks at strength 7, AP -1, 3 damage. Oh, and that's also with +1 to wound since the Preacher is leading his squad. But the Palatine getting extra attacks, each of which can be lethal hits, and every one of them that wounds, as in you get to the allocate wound section of the attack step, those can become mortal wounds. That's what we like. But then it costs a miracle dice, whereas the Preacher does not. We also have a great showing of Exorcist to provide anti-tank firepower from out of line of sight, or to provide a large blocking vehicle to get in the way of enemy units, and we can still fire the Exorcist missile launcher while in close combat, even at the enemy that's in close combat with us because of big guns never tire, and the missiles from the Exorcist missile launcher are not blast. I do very much encourage Exorcist use. We also have Celestine and Seraphim. Celestine with the Seraphim is wonderful for dropping in on the enemy backlines. A lot of home objectives are very poorly defended. Now, in the previous Genestealer Cult list, 20 Neophytes is not nothing, and also you couldn't deploy within 12 inches of them because of the Clamavus. But in a lot of other lists, there's like 5 Cabalites there, a squad of 10 Cultists, 5 to 10 of whatever the cheapest thing is the enemy has got. Hand Flamers and Celestine's Flamer are wonderful for clearing them away. And after we've done that, we can still move in the same phase using the Seraphim special ability. This ability doesn't stop working just because Celestine is in the unit. As Seraphim die, Celestine can cry and bring them back. It doesn't have to be just the Geminae, it can be the regular Seraphim as well, and this is a surprisingly tough unit that can be there, stay in the enemy deployment zone, and score teleport homers behind enemy lines as secondary cards. If the entire squad is wiped out, and Celestine goes down as well, on a 2+ she's coming back as Resurrection. Even at this point, she can cry and bring back Geminae, because the two starting units are the 5 Seraphim and Celestine with 2 Geminae. There is another situation in the rule that we can make use of to make this unit last even longer. Now, when a character is in an attached unit, you can't allocate attacks to that character. And the reason we would want to do that with Celestine is because of life wards. As long as there's at least one Geminae superior there, Celestine has a 4+ feel no pain. That doesn't mean the attack is reallocated to the Geminae, it's just Celestine gets a feel no pain. So while in a unit of Seraphim or Zephyrim, you can't allocate attacks to Celestine, but if she's by herself, and by herself I mean Celestine plus 2 Geminae as she comes here, that isn't an attached unit. That is just a unit. One of them has a character keyword, but it's not an attached unit, so this rule, which is all about attached units, doesn't trigger. So just the 3 of them can be very tough. You allocate hits to Celestine, then not only are we using the 2+ save with the 4+ invulnerable save, we're also getting a 4+ feel no pain, and if she dies, as the first model she would die because when you keep allocating attacks to a model, you keep allocating them there until the model is destroyed, with the exception of characters in attached units who take damage from like a hazardous roll or a sniper. You don't keep hitting them, you then go back to hitting the squad normally. That's not the case here. Celestine's died, we still have the 2 Geminae, Celestine comes back, and she returns in the unit when she's destroyed. So if you are wondering about destroying Necron Lords, do they come back within the same unit? Or have you kicked away part of the Lich Guard power combo? They come back in the same unit. Same for any of our sisters that use this stratagem to return to the battlefield when they've been destroyed. They come back in the same squad. So once you've done that, once Celestine's gone down, and presumably popped back up again, then you can do the same thing again. Reallocate all the hits to Celestine. Once she goes down again, we still have 2 Geminae going around who still have a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, and they can be completing actions, deploying teleport homers, and harassing the enemy. I am expecting that in the new codex, which we have another 6 months to go, the Geminae will be once again separated a bit like in 8th edition, or really what it'll be like is more the murder buckets that the Necrons have. You put them in a unit with a cryptech. So this would be, you can have the 2 Geminae, but only if you add them to Celestine if she's in a unit. Then they would become another part of the bodyguard. But enough about using rules the way they weren't necessarily intended, but the way they definitely are. Neither of these sister lists include Vahl or Paragon Warsuits. And when I was looking at an all-vehicle or mechanized list, I also didn't include Vahl and Paragon Warsuits. I find them to be very overcosted. I mean, I don't include them because I just don't like the models, and they are quite the pain to put together, but they're not as tough as you would think. They have a profile a little bit better than a Terminator, with an extra wound and an extra toughness, but you only get 3 of them, whereas you get 5 Terminators for about the same points. Their main use is to go with Morvenn Vahl, so you rarely see them separate. Maybe it could work at like a 500 point game as 2 relatively strong for that size units, but don't let the profile fool you into thinking that they are very tough. What they can do is damage. Morvenn Vahl lets them reroll hit rolls and wound rolls, and they can deliver a hit in much the same way as Retributors can, but much like Retributors, the Paragon Warsuits need Morvenn Vahl, the Retributors need to come out of an Immolator. The Paragon Warsuits, especially with the Maul, can do a great tank shock, strength 12. They have the grenade keyword, so we can use grenades as well, but we're putting a lot of command points into a unit just to make it effective. And while they can move up at a respectable 8 inches, we're looking at a cost more than a Mortifier, but for a very similar profile. There's no invulnerable save, it's +1 to the save, but 3 Mortifiers is something you could take as 3 separate units, giving you more chance to block more of the enemy, still perform tank shock, and they have a feel no pain. That's where their protection comes in. And then we're not spending 300 points on 1 unit to deliver some good damage, but that also makes a great target for all of the enemy anti-tank firepower. So that, generally, is why you don't see Paragon Warsuits taken in competitive lists. Not as much. There's some still do. And you may like Paragon Warsuits. You may think they're really cool, that they have big sticks to beat people with, that they are the big sisters of the army. but they're not quite at the competitive cutting edge. Perhaps in January they'll get a slight points decrease, then I can recommend them. But only one squad, unless it's a heavy points decrease, then we can take multiple squads, one of which could have Morvenn Vahl, potentially, depending on what her points look like in January. So this is a very vehicle-heavy list, and while I can't take credit for the list, not that I would try to, because my video on Mechanized Sisters came out after this event, and I didn't know about this list when I went to make my video, but if you want more advice on using Sisters with vehicles, there is a video just for you. My darlings and viewers, the great day of 40k.